They didn't tell you the truth. They said if you show up consistently, give your time, your attention, your loyalty, if you stay open, available, understanding, people will respect you. They'll value you. They'll choose you. But reality feels different. The more you give, the less it seems to matter. The more present you are, the easier it becomes to overlook you. And somewhere in that quiet shift, something begins to crack. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough to make you question what you believed.
Welcome to True Stoic Journal, the path to inner control.
There's a reason for that. Human nature doesn't hold on to what is always there. It drifts toward what feels uncertain, what feels like it could disappear. As Epictetus taught, control lies not in what is given freely, but in what is chosen. And when your presence is no longer governed, it loses its weight. But when it becomes deliberate, it begins to mean something again. There's a quiet shift that happens when something becomes constant. It doesn't lose its value. It loses its impact. The mind adapts quickly, faster than most people notice. What once felt rare becomes normal, and what is normal becomes invisible. Not because it no longer matters, but because it no longer demands attention. Value is not just about what exists. It's about what is felt. And when your presence becomes predictable, it stops being felt in the same way. This doesn't just apply to things. It applies even more to attention, energy, and emotional availability. When something is always accessible, the mind stops registering it as significant. It stops asking questions. It stops leaning in. Certainty replaces curiosity, and over time, certainty erases appreciation. That's why effort alone doesn't guarantee recognition. You can give more, show up more, and still feel overlooked. Not because you lack value, but because your value has become familiar. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What we do now echoes in eternity." Yet even something meaningful can lose its echo in the present when it is given without awareness. When actions are constant and unmeasured, they blend into routine. And routine rarely captures attention. This is where a subtle truth appears. Value is not just in what you give, but in how it is experienced. And experience is shaped by contrast, by variation, by the presence of absence. At first, consistency feels like strength, and in many ways it is. But consistency without boundaries becomes predictability. And predictability removes tension. Without tension, there is no curiosity. Without curiosity, there is no focus. The mind drifts toward what feels uncertain, what feels incomplete, what feels like it could change. This isn't manipulation. It's simply how attention works. Think about how quickly patterns form. A message always answered immediately becomes expected. Attention always given becomes assumed. Emotional support always available becomes taken for granted. None of this happens intentionally. It happens gradually. By the time it's noticed, the dynamic has shifted. What once felt appreciated now feels overlooked, and the instinct is to give more to fix it. But giving more in the same pattern only deepens the problem. The mind doesn't measure value by effort. It measures it by contrast. Epictetus made this clear in a different way. He who is not a good servant will not be a good master. Control begins internally, not externally. When your presence is given without restraint, it becomes reactive, and anything reactive eventually loses direction. This is where many people lose their influence. Not because they lack value, but because they've stopped directing where their energy goes. The shift begins with awareness. Noticing where your presence has become automatic. Noticing where your attention is given without intention. Because once something is given unconsciously, it loses weight. But when it is chosen deliberately, even in small ways, it begins to matter. Again, It's easy to confuse constant presence with importance. But importance is not measured by frequency. It's measured by depth. And depth requires space. Moments where something is not instantly available, not immediately given, not entirely predictable. That's where attention sharpens. So the question is not how much you give. It's how it is experienced. Because something can exist in abundance and still feel scarce when it is controlled. And something can exist in abundance and feel invisible when it is not. The difference is not quantity. It's awareness. This is where quiet discipline reshapes everything. Not by giving less, but by giving with intention. By allowing your presence to carry meaning instead of just frequency. And over time, that shift changes how you are perceived. Not through force, not through explanation, but through something much simpler. What is not constant is noticed. And what is noticed begins to matter again. The change itself is subtle. It doesn't demand attention. It simply alters the rhythm. A slight delay, a calmer response, a moment of silence where there was once immediacy. And the mind notices. It always does, because when a pattern breaks, even slightly, attention returns. Patterns allow people to relax around you. They make you predictable, easy to read, and easy to understand. But when that pattern shifts even just a little, something changes. The mind starts observing again. It starts paying attention in a way it didn't before. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because something is no longer certain. And that's where everything begins to shift. Not because you tried to control the outcome, but because you stopped making yourself completely predictable. You stopped being automatic. You became intentional. This is where the shift begins. Not by removing yourself entirely, but by altering the rhythm. A calm response where there was once predictable emotion. A moment of silence where there was once constant engagement. These are small changes, but they carry disproportionate impact because the mind is highly sensitive to disruption. It notices when something familiar becomes uncertain. Seneca once wrote, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." But there is another layer to this idea. Attention follows what feels uncertain. When everything is expected, there is no opportunity for attention to grow. It stays flat, predictable, unremarkable. But the moment expectation is interrupted even slightly, the mind shifts. It leans in. It starts observing again. The mistake most people make is thinking they need to do more to regain attention. But more of the same pattern only reinforces predictability. And predictability removes curiosity. When nothing changes, nothing stands out. So the real shift is not about adding, it's about adjusting, about creating just enough variation to break the automatic flow. It's about controlled unpredictability. A kind of presence that feels steady but not fully readable. Because when someone can't fully predict you, they can't fully relax around you. There's a quiet discipline required here. It's not about reacting differently because of emotion. It's about choosing responses with intention. When behavior shifts from reaction to decision, it carries a different energy. It feels grounded, not impulsive. Carl Jung once observed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Patterns operate in that unconscious space. They guide behavior without being questioned. But the moment they are seen, they can be changed. And that change requires awareness. Noticing where behavior has become automatic, where responses are no longer chosen, but expected. As that awareness grows, something subtle begins to shift. You start to notice how small changes create different reactions. How a delayed response draws more attention than an immediate one. How silence can create more curiosity than explanation. How calmness can disrupt expectations more than emotional reactions. These are not tricks. They are reflections of how the mind processes uncertainty. And uncertainty, when used with control, becomes a powerful force. The mind doesn't react as strongly to what it understands as it does to what it cannot fully explain. That's where attention deepens. That's where focus returns. The moment something changes, even slightly, the mind reacts. It begins to search for meaning in the shift. Not because anything was clearly stated, but because something was left unsaid. That absence becomes noticeable. And once it's noticed, it creates a quiet tension. The instinct is to resolve it, to explain, to clarify, to fill the silence. But in doing that, something important is lost. Clarity has its place. But when it is given too early, it removes curiosity. And curiosity is what keeps attention alive. When something is incomplete, the mind doesn't let go of it easily. It replays it. So the question becomes not how to remove tension but how to allow it to exist without reacting to it. Epictetus once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." There is a quiet strength in allowing misunderstanding to exist without rushing to correct it. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every shift needs to be explained. There's something powerful about restraint that often goes unnoticed. It doesn't draw attention to itself, but it changes how everything is perceived. When you don't immediately explain, you create space. And in that space, something begins to form. The other person starts to think. They start to interpret. And interpretation is far more engaging than being told exactly what to think. The mind fixates on what is unresolved. That's why silence can carry more weight than words. It creates a gap, and the mind is wired to fill gaps. It leans into it, trying to make sense of it. And in that space, decisions become clearer. You engage when it feels aligned, not when it is expected. You respond when it feels meaningful, not when it is automatic. Emotional scarcity is not about withholding for effect. It is about aligning behavior with intention, about making sure that what is given is chosen, not reflexive. Over time, this creates a different kind of presence. One that is not overwhelming, not constant, but steady in its selectiveness. It appears, it engages, and then it steps back. And in that stepping back, something remains. A sense of weight, a sense of meaning, a sense of value that lingers beyond the moment itself. There's also a shift internally. Less energy is spent maintaining patterns that no longer serve. More focus is placed on what feels aligned, what feels grounded, and what feels intentional. And that internal shift supports everything else. Because when energy is not scattered, it becomes stronger. It becomes more focused. Epictetus once said, "Don't seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do happen, and your life will go smoothly." It removes the constant friction that comes from trying to control outcomes. You respond because it feels aligned, not because you are hoping for a specific reaction. This is where silence stops being a tool and becomes a natural state. Marcus Aurelius reflected this idea when he wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." When that stability is present, external dynamics lose their hold. You can care without losing your center. In the end, nothing changes more than the moment you stop chasing what cannot be controlled. When your presence is no longer driven by need, it becomes something rare, steady, and impactful. That's where real power begins. Not in what you say or show, but in what you hold back. If this shifted something in you, don't let it fade here. There's another video on your screen that goes deeper into this path. Watch it and keep building that quiet strength. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal.